What up, YouTube? It's your boy ATrueHero, fresh off of a third place at YCS Anaheim. But today, we're not here to talk about my accomplishments. We're here to talk about one card and one card only, and that's Deck Devastation Virus. Now, you might be wondering, ATrueHero, where have you been? Why haven't you been posting lately? Well, let me show you. Now, if you know ATrueHero, he loves Yu-Gi-Oh! But one thing that he loves more than Yu-Gi-Oh! Are the hoes. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you've got to come to Korea for yourself. And hey, even if Korean girls aren't your thing, there are plenty attractive Korean guys here too. It's 2024. ATrueHero doesn't judge. But anyway, back to the seriousness. We're here to talk about DDV and its impact on the current Edison meta. These days, everybody has been complaining about DDV.
Now it's difficult to play decks like Dragon Turbo, Quick Draw, or anything really that's not a big 3 deck because of Deck Devastation Virus. Deck Devi, as we all know, is a very broken card, and unfortunately, there's no way to actually counter this. We're basically going to have Deck Devi in the main for basically the entire format now, and that does limit deck creativity.
Saying the card's too broken and that it's an unfair card, it should be taken out of Edison format, we should create a separate ban list. Edison format has no shortage of powerful cards. Brain Control, Heavy Storm, Dark Arm Dragon are just a few to name. However, all of these cards, with the exception of Brain Control, because it's so broken, can be played around. How do you play around Heavy Storm? Don't commit many back rows to the field. How do you play around Dark Arm? Keep your opponent off 3 darks. How do you play around DDV? Well, that's what we're going to learn about here today. But before getting into that, a little bit about the history of DDV in Edison format. Do you know who the first person to main deck DDV was? That's right, it was me, ATrueHero.
Next up, Dust Shoot. This is the Trinity right here. Dust Shoot, Mind Crush, Deck Dev.
It's actually surprising he has Mind Crush and on top of it, Deck Dev, but he has a separate video that you guys can check out from his channel, ATrueHero.
And I explain it in detail. But anyway, Dust Shoot, if you resolve it, you win a game. Deck Devi, if you resolve it, you're going to win the game. Mind Crush, so if you resolve it, you may win the game. But
now, I have a question for you. In regards to Deck Dev, how many times has that been a win con in some of your matches?
If I resolve it, I win. It's that simple. If I resolve it, I win. But I actually, depending on the matchup, I side it out. So I don't keep it in for every single matchup. Like, for example, Gladiator Beast, I'm not keeping Deck Dev.
And you pulled that out twice in, like, the semifinals, or it was in top 4?
Yeah. I pulled it. I played the Amaryllis Burn guy. Really great player. He wound up getting 3rd place in the whole event. I Deck Devied him, and that was it. You resolve Deck Devi, like, you win. I've been telling people, like, this card is cracked. Like, people, I don't know, it's inconsistent. Fine, don't play it. Like, the card's cracked. All right, anyway, moving on. Deck Devi, I'm the one who kind of started this, or introduced this card to the meta. I played it in Diva Hero, and it was really successful for me. It's easier to resolve this in Black Wings because of the triple Sirocco, and also you can make Arm Wing and Armor Master. So, the card is just, it's broken. You get hand knowledge, and usually if I resolve this card, I just win. So, Deck Devi's amazing. Double Prison, Deck Devi. Did you guys know? Did you guys know? ATrueHero was the first person to main deck DDV, the first one. I'm sure everyone who knows even a little about me has heard this before, but I'm going to slam this narrative into the ground because I want everyone in the world to know. If you get Deck Devi, thank ATrueHero or curse ATrueHero. I don't care. Just know it's because of me. I was the very first one to main deck it in Diva Hero. Anyway, going on.
Okay, so now that you know who's responsible for your turmoil, let's get into ATrueHero's guide of DDV for dummies. Firstly, we need to know how to properly use Deck Devastation Virus. It's not always as simple as activating it at the first chance that you have available. There are times when you should hold it and times when you should not. Times you should side it and times you should keep it in. So let's cover everything in detail. Now the first point is rather basic and simple in nature. Generally, you want to use this card against decks that have an abundance of low attack monsters, such as Raikou, Blizzard, Treeborn Frog. These are just a few that are popular in the Edison meta. Now keep in mind, you activate DDV during the standby phase and your opponent has a Treeborn Frog. Well, since it's still the standby phase, that Treeborn Frog will be able to come back. And if you wait until the main phase and then DDV, well, you actually missed this opportunity because of priority. Your opponent has, at the start of every phase, the option to take the first action at the start of every phase. Therefore, they can do things such as tribute Treeborn Frog or even play a normal spell before you can activate DDV during the start of the main phase, unless they pass priority. So just keep that in mind when using DDV against Treeborn Frog. Secondly, you want to use DDV before your opponent gains advantage. So, in decks such as Vayu Turbo, they play an abundance of small monsters as well, such as Armageddon Knight, Hamster, Raikou, Card Trooper, etc. But many of these monsters gain advantage once they hit the field. What do I mean? So, yes, you can DDV an Armageddon Knight that was summoned, but now its effect is already resolved. It's going to be able to send the card to the graveyard. You can DDV a Card Trooper after it's already hit the field, but now they're going to be able to draw a card. And this also is the same case with Sangan as well. Decks that play Sangan, yes, you can DDV a Sangan on the field, but now its effect's going to resolve. So, before your opponent gains advantage with their smaller monsters, you should activate DDV proactively. Next, you should use DDV against decks that tend to set a lot of monsters, such as Gravekeeper Spy, Hamster, Raikou, etc. DDV is amazing at taking out set monsters, and DDV is also part of the reason why cards such as Nobleman of Crossout don't see as much play in the current Edison meta, because DDV does it all. And lastly, you should use it to scout your opponent's hand. This is one of the most powerful effects of DDV. Actually, oftentimes, the reason why you win with DDV isn't because of the cards that you hit, it's because of the knowledge that you gain. This is also what makes cards such as Trap Dust Shoot so powerful. Yes, you're putting a card back, but what really gives you the advantage is knowing what each and every card is in your opponent's hand. And DDV does that for 3 turns. So generally, if you could activate DDV on your opponent's first turn, I recommend shotgunning it, if it's not going to put you at such an advantage to make a monster that can be tributed with DDV. DDV also has a lot of other practical applications as well, such as in the Frog matchup. It's really good for breaking up the dupe lock and making them miss timing. When Treeborn comes back during the standby phase, if you chain DDV to the activation of Treeborn's effect, Treeborn will be chain link 1, DDV will be chain link 2. The chain will resolve backwards, and Dupe Frog will miss timing. Not to mention, you can also use DDV to dodge cards like Bottomless Trap Hole, D-Prison, etc. Now, DDV is not perfect against every single matchup, so here are a few decks that I recommend siding out DDV in. Black Wings, Hero Beat, Gladiator Beast, and Lightsworn. Now keep in mind, DDV does have a slight level of effectiveness against each one of these decks shown on screen. For example, against Black Wings, it can hit cards like Gale, Colute, Blizzard, etc. Against Hero Beat, it can hit cards like Honest, Deep Sea Diva, Spine Gilman, DD Warrior Lady, etc. Against Gladiator Beast, it can hit cards like Test Tiger, Ready Ari, Bestiari, etc. And against Lightsworn, it can hit cards like Arcus, Lumina, Plague, etc. So yes, DDV does have some level of effectiveness against these decks. However, there are better cards that you can side in its place that would be more effective in those matchups. What are they? Well, watch ATrueHero's videos. How to beat Blackwings, how to beat Hero Beat, how to beat Gladiator Beast, and soon, how to beat Light Swarms. But anyway, let's move on. So let's talk about how to not use DDV. This is very important because you don't want to misplay with such a powerful card. Although DDV is a very broken card, it can be used improperly, in the same way that Heavy Storm can be used improperly. If you heavy too early, then you miss your chance at saving a powerful card that could have been used for a game shot. Or if you heavy at the wrong time, you can also hit draw traps, and you won't feel good when that happens. So even a very powerful card such as DDV can be misused. So let's talk about how to not use DDV. Generally against decks that have monsters with a high attack. So I just named a few in the previous slide. So Gladiator Beast, Hero Beat, these are just a few. Also, you should not use DDV if you don't have a follow-up. So you have to remember, DDV in most cases requires 2 cards that you have to commit for it to resolve. DDV and the monster that you're tributing. Now, if the monster that you tribute cripples your board presence, so you don't have any follow-up at all, it's worth considering not activating DDV. Because yes, you'll get hand knowledge, but you won't be able to take advantage of that hand knowledge. So generally, because the thing about Yu-Gi-Oh! Is every single game state can change, but generally it's not good to activate DDV if you can't follow up behind it. Also, against graveyard-based decks. So DDV, send the cards to the graveyard. Now I just want to be very clear. Vayu Turbo is the most popular graveyard deck in Edison format. Next would be Zombies and the zombie variants. However, against these 2 decks, DDV is actually very effective. Although they are graveyard-based decks, these type of decks get hurt by DDV because they also play a lot of recruiters, cards that don't get benefits from the graveyard. For example, zombies play cards like Pyramid Turtle, Mystic Tomato, etc. And Vayu Turbo plays cards like Armageddon Knight, the formerly mentioned Card Trooper, and Vayu. And where you might think, well, isn't sending Vayu to the grave a bad thing from the perspective of the person who activated DDV? And the answer is complex. Because yes, sending Vayu to the graveyard can sometimes prove to be ineffective, but at the same time, the Vayu Turbo player generally wants the Vayus in their hand, because that way they can pitch them with cards like Dark Grepher. Lastly, you should not use DDV on boards that don't threaten you. So for example, if you're just activating DDV just to activate DDV, you may want to consider holding on to it for a crucial moment. If your opponent doesn't have many cards to destroy, it may not be worth it. But once again, as I said before, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a very situational game, and every game state differs. Here are a few decks that DDV is oftentimes very effective against. Hero Frogs, Vayu Turbo, Diva Hero, and Fairies. And the reason being, against Hero Frogs, you can utilize it to break the dupe lock. Bear in mind, games 2 and 3, the DDV tends to be less effective because good frog players tend to side out a lot of their smaller monsters. Vayu Turbo, I've already mentioned many of the cards that get hit by it. Once again, these cards are Armageddon Knight, Card Trooper, Raiko, Hamster, Vayu himself. A lot of the deck is crippled by DDV. Diva Hero, as a Diva Hero enthusiast, I can tell you firsthand that this card, played at the right time, can crush the deck. It hits Diva, Malicious, Plague, Treeborn, almost every starter in the deck, Gravekeeper Spy, if that's the version that you're choosing to play, Descendant, etc. Now, the one advantage the Diva Hero player has as many of the monsters that you hit with DDV tend to be heroes and warders. So you can essentially make their Miracle Fusion live, and they can counteract your DDV with a Miracle Fusion. Last but not least, fairies. Fairies get absolutely destroyed by DDV. Within all of Edison format, I believe fairies gets hits the hardest. They lose almost every single monster that they play. Shining Angel, Nova Summoner, DD Warrior Lady, Herald of Orange Light, the list goes on and on. One of the few cards it doesn't hit is Christia. So, against these 4 decks, and others as well, DDV is very effective. Okay, the moment many of you have been waiting for. How do we counter this broken card? Well, first of all, you can change your deck so that you're utilizing higher attack monsters. Remember, DDV only hits monsters with an attack of 1500 or higher. There are so many great monsters that you can play that meet this requirement. Not to mention, you can improve your side decking skills. Some decks can't help but to play monsters with an attack of 1500 or less, such as Quick Draw or even Frogs. However, games 2 and 3, you can side out a lot of these smaller monsters for monsters with higher attacks or spells and traps that can help mitigate the damage that DDV can do. Remember, as a duelist, you play more games 2 and 3 than you do game 1. And although the general trend of DDV has switched to it being in the main deck, still you can counter it the majority of the set if you improve your side decking skills. Next, you have to adapt your main deck to the meta. How do you adapt your main deck to the meta? 1, as I've already mentioned, utilize higher attack monsters in your build, but also you can use spells and traps like Trap Stun or My Body as a Shield. At YCS Anaheim, I did not main deck MST. I chose to main deck Cold Wave instead. Why? Because Cold Wave is broken, but also it's a soft out to DDV. And even in my most current iteration of DivaHero, I don't main deck MST. Instead, I opt to main deck Trap Stun, because Trap Stun counters all the problem cards that DivaHero struggles against. It counters Royal Oppression, Torrential Tribute, and even the focus card of this video, Deck Devastation Virus. Trap Stun is so good, so utilize it. But Trap Stun isn't the only option. My Body as a Shield could be a great substitute for cards like MST as well. Think about it. What card do you want to MST the majority of the time? Cards like Mirror Force, Torrential Tribute, Royal Oppression, and of course, DDV. My Body as a Shield works on all of these cards. Of course, with Royal Oppression, it can be a bit tricky, but if you successfully summon a monster and then special summon, such as Summon Diva, activate the effect, you can activate My Body and destroy the Royal Oppression. Nevertheless, the point is this: you have to change your main deck to adapt. That is how you grow better as a player. You have to adapt. Think about where Edison has come from thus far. In the beginning of the Edison format, nobody knew how powerful Blackwings were. But once Blackwings began picking up its steam, people started playing decks like Hero Beat, because Hero Beat counters Blackwings. Same thing. Okay, more people are starting to use DDV in their main deck, then now you and your main deck need to construct it in such a way that it doesn't become crippled when your opponent activates DDV. So here before you, I've given 3 different strategies of how to counter DDV. Use higher attack monsters, improve your side decking skills, and just adapt your main deck to the meta. But if these 3 tips aren't enough for you, I've saved the best for last. And that is, if you can't beat them, join them. Why are you complaining about a card that is so good? You can use it too. If my opponent used Brain Control, I'm using Brain Control. If my opponent is using Heavy Storm, I'm using Heavy Storm. And if my opponent is using DDV, I'm using DDV. Well, technically everyone's using DDV because I used it first, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, the point is, you have the option to use this powerful card as well. So, use it. Anyway, with all of this out the way, let's get into some dueling book scenarios of how DDV is used and its different levels of effectiveness. Now, in this game state, I'm playing DevaHero, and I managed to make Dark End Dragon. I swing for 26 to play around Gores. My opponent doesn't have it. I set DDV, and I have my turn. Generally, it's better to shotgun DDV. However, in this particular game state, I didn't want to activate DDV because the turn prior, I activated Gold Sarcophagus for Dark Arm Dragon. And if you take a look at my graveyard, I already have 4 darks. So if I activate DDV, Dark End Dragon will be the 5th dark. So I really don't want to activate DDV unless I absolutely have to. Because at any point in time, I can stack a card for Plague, get back to 3 darks, and then drop Dark Arm. Now, my opponent puts me in a position where I have to activate DDV because he activates Heavy Storm. It forces me to activate DDV, which also messes up my dark count for Dark Arm. Nevertheless, we can see how much DDV impacted the game truly. One point that I want to make known is that DDV oftentimes takes the place of a card such as Royal Oppression. So, of course, if this was Royal Oppression, then Royal Oppression would have gotten Heavy Stormed and I could no longer use its effect. But since DDV is a chainable, I did get the additional benefit of resolving its effect over the course of the next 3 turns. So I activate DDV, but let's look at how much it really impacted this game state. Yes, in this scenario, it was another 2 for 2, as I hit both his Krebons and his Plague Spreader Zombie. Now, my opponent does have a follow-up with Book of Life, but I have DD Crow. But the point of this isn't to explain once again whether or not I won or lost, but just to show the impact of DDV. Yes, my opponent did lose 2 cards. Yes, I do have complete knowledge of his hands, and I don't want to undermine how broken this is. It is extremely broken, but it doesn't necessarily mean that my opponent is going to lose the duel from this 1 card alone. There are so many great cards my opponent can draw into, such as Dark Arm Dragon. If at any point my opponent draws into Dark Arm, he could just go Dark Arm into Caius, assuming that I committed a card to the board, and that would be game. So the resolution of DDV is not always game. Anyway, I chain Crow, and I add Dark Arm Dragon to my hand. And we can just quickly see how this set plays out. I banish Dark Arm, normal Army Knight, attack for 14. I see my opponent has Teleport. Here, my opponent goes Instant Fusion, sacks for Caius, hits my Army Knight, I bottomless. He can't do anything. I summon Gardner because at this point, I just want to go for damage to try to win as fast as possible. Last turn of Deck Devi, he pulling the rug. I set a back row. He draws into Brain Con, sacks for Caius, hits the back row. And unfortunately, the reason why he actually wound up losing this game is because he lost to 50-50. Had he hit the Return from a Different Dimension and stuck to his play of not attacking, then he could have won this game. Let's take a look at this game state. I'm on Black Wings and my opponent is on Vayu Turbo. During main phase 1, I did not utilize my normal summon because my opponent has yet to use power cards such as Mirror Force or Torrential. So I go straight into the battle phase. Gores attempts to run over the Arm Wing and my opponent responds with Deck Devi. As you can see, Deck Devi is a 2 for 2. He sacrifices his Arm Wing and he loses DDV, and I lose my Blizzard and Kolute. In my opinion, this was a bit of a misplay, because if he was going to activate DDV, it may have been better to shotgun it, because if I summon my Blizzard and he chains DDV, I can still bring back my Shora. Nevertheless, this is one of the problems with DDV. When you activate it, you're sacrificing one of your monsters, and sometimes that monster can be your only lines of defense or offense. Take a look at my opponent's graveyard. He does not have a value, which means once this Armwing hits the grave, all he has left on his board is just a Lila. So we can actually see how this game plays out. I lose my 2 cards, I reveal the Bora, I think about whether it's worth it to attack or not, I do attack, and on my following turn, I attack with Gores and I win the game. Now, of course, this is just one scenario with DDV, but the point is, just because you draw DDV and resolve it, doesn't mean that you always automatically win. Okay, for this final replay showcasing DDV's power, I'm on Value Turbo. And as you can see, something is suspicious because my opponent is playing cards like Thunder Dragon, Toon Table of Contents, and we can see clearly that he is on Exodia. At first I'm thinking, what's going on? Am I playing GOAT format? Now after the card destruction resolves, I draw into Vayu, Sirocco, and DDV. So my DDV is live. Now, don't misunderstand me. The point of this video is to show that although DDV is powerful, it's not necessarily the be-all end-all. Why did my opponent lose game 1? It's because he's playing a bad deck. He's playing Exodia. That deck just does not thrive in Edison format. Now we start up game 2 after my opponent says some rude comments, and I draw DDV again, and my opponent just scoops. But why did he scoop? Was it because of DDV? Maybe, but in reality, he just bricked. So, guys, of course, this was a little bit of a trolly segment, but the point is, DDV, though it's a powerful card, it is not overpowered to the point where we should do things like ban it or create a separate ban list. We just have to adapt. That is the beautiful thing about Yu-Gi-Oh! Although we are playing in a locked format, it still leaves room for adaptation. Look at all the decks that have sprung up over the past year and innovations. Hero Beat, for example, although this isn't a deck that has necessarily been innovated recently, Hero Beat is a deck that almost directly counters deck Devastation virus. Very few of the monsters in that deck get hit by it. And Hero Beat decks in general are quite good against the bird decks, which have been taking their spot in the limelight recently. Now, I do want to just be very clear. When I say Hero Beat, I mean the old school Hero Beat with like skill drains, aliases, King Barbers, the Barbie dolls. The newer Diva Hero Beat, that's more susceptible to DDV because you play cards like Diva, Spine Gilman, Honest, etc. Nevertheless, there are so many decks, even Gladiator Beasts, that don't necessarily crumble to the activation of DDV. And if you are finding trouble with your deck and DDV, I suggest main decking cards to counter it. Once again, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is about adapting to the meta. How can you adapt to a DDV? You can start to main deck cards like My Body as a Shield or even Trap Stun. These are excellent cards that do more than just protect against DDV. They can also be used against cards like Mirror Force, Torrential, etc. Anyway, guys, that's it for today's video. And just remember, next time you get DDV'd, think of a true hero. Peace. Shoutouts to all my current and former members of the Absolute Zero tier. You guys are the real MVP. To everyone else, if you're looking for exclusive content, please check out the Patreon. And remember, there's a hero in all of us.
Subscribe or you too will be sent to the Shadow Realm.